Hi, welcome again to Who's Who in Southern Alberta. Well, folks, we've got a big one this week. She's not going to like that. But a big star who's been part of Southern Alberta for, well, almost as long as I can remember, Joan Waterfield. Welcome to the show, Joan.
I love the billing, a big star. Just call me a small twinkle. That'll do it. A small twinkle in the eye of fate. That'll do it.
Before we get on to talk about all the different things that you've been involved in over the years, I wanted to introduce a project that we're developing this year, and you may have some input in this. And if I don't talk about it now, I'm sure we're going to forget about it because we're going to be all over the place in just a few minutes. Some of you may be aware that 1992 is the 200th anniversary of the first written description of Southern Alberta. Now, I'm always into centennials, and bicentennials seem to be even bigger than that. And I think it's something that we should remember. And so we've designed this little gadget here, which we call a buffalo chip, simply because on the front of it there's a sketch that was the first sketch that was ever done of a buffalo. I want to give you one of these while I talk about it, and you can actually keep it. They're worth $1, but for you it's free. That's your pay for today.
Do you know who the artist was?
No, I shouldn't say that. I did know. It's a Spanish fellow. It was done by a Spaniard who had never seen a buffalo, but he had heard about one. And so he made this drawing, and I think it's pretty accurate. I'm sorry, I doubt the cameras can show it up.
Exactly.
The head, you'll notice, is a little smaller, and I think in future programs we'll have a drawing of this most unique character. We call him Fiddler because of Peter Fiddler, who was the first explorer to come into this area in, as I said, 1792. So we want to drum up a little bit of enthusiasm in this community for that anniversary.
Well, if you put that in historical context, that was around the time of the French Revolution.
That's right.
And that's the fascinating bit, when you make a contact with history.
That's right.
And you realize what else was going on in the world at that time. Then you really get a picture of it, don't you, Bruce?
One of the things that fascinates me is that Peter Fiddler, in his journal, which I have and which I plan on making available to the people, as soon as I find 50 people that would like a copy of it, we're going to run it off, and we're going to put it in a nice simulated leather-bound book like this. But anyway, in his journal, he actually describes a working buffalo jump. He's the only person I know who ever went
actually saw one, other than in Indian lore.
That's right. And he described, one of the things he describes that you don't even get when you're at head smash, and he describes the stench of, from rotting carcasses, and how.
Well, I'm a constant movie goer, and they've tried 3D, and then in fact they tried the smellies, so maybe they could, infuse the head smashed in with a suitable effluvia.
Yes, they say that when you get down to the digs where they're digging for the remains, that you can get the smell from that. But I'm sure it's not nearly as much as it was when Fiddler went through.
Yes.
Anyway, before we get on to the story, let me just show you what these great little buffalo chips do. They're a scientific mechanism. Two different metals expand at a different rate. And a few years ago, we tried putting them on. You have to train a buffalo chip. It's just like a real buffalo or a dog or a cat. You got to train it. And when you push the side like this and you get it trained, so you just get it the right amount of, you're going to destroy that, I can tell.
Am I? That's me. You see, I'm always wholehearted with everything.
You can
I go
train
for
it,
broke.
and you just put it down here, and then after a while, it as the two metals expand different rates, the thing will eventually pop up. Now, these are completely untrained. They were newly born. I got them out of the bag this morning.
Yes.
So they're not trained. So we help it along. We have here a chip.
Whoops! Mine just did it. And you thought I was too fierce.
That's right. Well, maybe I'm not even going to need my chip launcher. The chip launcher here I brought in because of the troubles we had last time with them expanding, sitting there and just sort of looking at us. They wouldn't go off at all.
Oops! There we go again.
This has a freezer bag in it, so that it's colder here than it is on the top of the chip, and that.
What is that?
That's a freezer bag inside. It's made out of 2 muffin tins. I may get it patented, and
that's brilliant.
I found the other day while we were at the Heritage Show, and I'm sure this is going to be shown much later, but it was a very hot. What was almost 36, 37 degrees.
It was uncomfortable, yes.
And I found that this chip launcher was also good for sitting on. And it could cool you off.
A little padding. But what it is, it's environmentally sound. Getting away from all that plastic foamy stuff and
yes,
everything.
yes.
I mean, you could get such a Big Mac in that one. And while I've got a sort of Jewish accent, you know, I've got a great name for the show in 1992 to commemorate the arrival of Peter Fiddler. We'll do Fiddler on the Hoof.
Fiddler on the Hoof.
You like that, do you?
That's a great.
Yes, I think it's a great one.
Maybe you could write that one. Let's just put this thing down here, and we're going to bring.
And
these up every
hope
week.
these don't attack.
They'll attack. But
Yes.
That's fun
Okay.
games. Let's get on with this.
Oops,
with
there
the
we go
stories.
again.
You know, last time we couldn't get those to work, but these were
It's
obviously.
my influence.
That's what it is.
Yes, you know, it's that Star Trek thing I've got, you know.
All right, Joan. I want to go back to my earliest recollections of Joan Waterfield.
Yes.
And as a little Todd, we went over to the Carnegie Library, the old library. In
Yes,
Lethbridge.
as a little tot. Yes, thanks a lot,
Now,
Bruce.
of course, you must have been, because you were so extremely young at the time.
Child bride,
You
yes.
must have just come over from Britain,
Uh-huh.
and one of your first jobs must have been storyteller at the library. Is that right?
Well, would you stop doing
Yeah,
that?
They're all finished now. Go home.
Yes. I came out in 46. I got married in 45 in Aberdeen, Scotland, came to Canada to a little two-room house on the north side, and my famous first words on arriving at my new home was, "But darling, where's the bathroom?" And my husband pointed to the west. And this was my first contact with the outside, you know, the outhouse.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I'd come to the end of the world. And my other contact, I don't know about buffalo chips, but grasshoppers were my bête noire. The very first day I went outside, I won't tell you where I was going, but I went outside, and these things flew up in my face, and I ran into the house and hid. And when my husband came home, he said, "Have you been out?" And I said, "No, there are things out there, you know. You talk about arachnophobia. There are things out there." And he said, "What things?" So I went out behind his back, and these things flew up, and he says, "Those are grasshoppers." But grasshoppers in Britain are so tiny that they can barely bend a leaf. And of course, we backed onto the prairie, and there used to be great stories about rattlesnake found on 13th Street North, which really made you feel at home. And of course, the weather exploded, and we weren't, you know, coming from sea level. We weren't used to the elevation, the extreme heat, and the extreme cold when the bedclothes froze up. I paid my dues. But we go on to the Carnegie Library.
So I arrived at the library, and Joan
I taught,
Waterfield,
yes.
the storyteller. You were a storyteller, was that?
Yes, I restarted after the war the storytelling, which took me into broadcasting, strangely enough. See, I have a great theory that life is a series of doors, Bruce. Sometimes you have to slam a door behind you. Sometimes you have to push like the dickens to open the one in front of you. And as you know, once in a while, life takes the door off the hinges and bashes you over the head with you. Well, I had, this is very true about my life. And so I had gone to work. My husband was unemployed. And I'll bring up a name, Miss Hazel Bletcher, who was the chief librarian there at what is now the Southern Alberta Art Gallery. And the only employment she had for me was pasting books in the bindery at 62.5 cents an hour, 3 hours. Well, there was a librarian there. She looked elderly to me, but you know, it's all in your concept of what elderly is. And when the 4 o'clock rush came in, which used to be massive, I mean, this is pre-TV, there were hundreds of children around that desk, and she just couldn't cope. So being a loving, kind, warm, compassionate person, I offered unpaid to go up and help her. And I used to pull such stunts, Bruce, because I'd say, "Hello, Johnny, how are you?" They couldn't get over that I knew their names, because all I did was flip up their library card. But there was a family here called Leong, a Chinese family, and there were many children. And so, you know, I'd say, "How are you, so-and-so?" "Oh, I'm not so-and-so. I'm my sister, you know." And then I go into my act. "Well, you look so like her." And, you know, it was really lovely to con the kids this way. And then they wanted the story hours. And so I volunteered. I'm the eternal volunteered. That's why I'm poor but lovely at the end of the chapter. And so I started the story hours, and that's how I went into broadcasting.
How did you, getting right back, how did you get that library in the first place? Were you going to pick up a book and you said, hey, I like telling stories? Or
No, it was John Dutton had arrived, and of course John had fresh ideas. Miss Bletcher was in failing health. She was a dear and beautiful woman, but she was in failing health, and John Dutton came through, and of course he had very many fresh ideas, and libraries were on the move then to sort of give many services, and so he wanted the story hours started, and Miss McNabb, who was the children's librarian, said, I simply cannot cope with that. And I said, all right, I'll go down and tell these stories. So I used to go down, and you know, I'll tell you a story against myself. I was out with a gentleman friend, considerably younger than myself, and we were in the Cotton Blossom Lounge in the Lethbridge Lodge. And a chap comes over, and this fellow that I'm with says, do you know Joan Waterfield? And the fellow says, oh yes. And like you, I would assume he's ages with you, he said, I used to listen to you on radio telling stories. And of course I'm used to being grandmother to half of southern Alberta through that. But then he came up with a real facer, because he said, now I wish there was something like that for my grandchild, which really put me age-wise where I was, you know. But it was, you know, people still come to me and say, I remember when you used to tell stories. And I'd tell them, I'd use the book as a prop, you know, and the big crocodile, and there'd be a child sitting there, and I'd have this picture book, and the big crocodile came along, and it opened its mouth, and I'd open the book like this, and snap! And of course the child, like your buffalo chips, would go right through the roof. But I love telling stories. People say, write the story of your life, but I prefer to tell it. I love that great heritage from the caveman days of telling stories.
did you, excuse me, take training in this in the old country, or?
No, I was always involved in theatre. In fact, next year I will celebrate my 60th year involvement with theatre. You know, and I started off with the BBC in Scotland as a child actress, but I was a voracious reader, and that's about the greatest gift that can be given to a child, the joy of reading, and that's the one thing I will proselytize. But I love telling stories, and when I teach children in drama, you know, you have to teach them range of voice, understanding, and that kind of thing. I always would say, go shut yourself in the bathroom and read out aloud. It's the best training you can give anybody. And I used to shut myself in the bathroom. And I remember when the book Rebecca came out, which has a wonderful opening. I'm going to write a show about great beginnings with the great openings of books. And I would sit there most romantically, very, very young, and read aloud, last night I dreamed I went back to Mandalay. And I'd be so enchanted with myself. But that was, I love telling stories. And I'd always done, you know. I mean, at the drop of a hat, I'll tell a story.
This, maybe we could get somebody to write this Fiddler on the Hoof, and you could take the star role.
Well, I don't know, as one of your buffalo chips, I'm still able, despite, you know, my accident, to be able to jump up and down and make noises, exactly.
What did you think when you came to southern Alberta and did you feel you were in the boonies?
It wasn't so much that as, you know, I'd left a very loving and very close family. I'd also left a city that, you know, here was my high school, Bruce. Over here was the art gallery, where we used to take our pies from the tuck shop and meet the boys from Robert Gordon's college. That was where we started meeting boys. Then next door was the museum. And then next, just down the way, was His Majesty's Theatre, where for sixpence I could sit up in the gods, you know, the highest tier, and see actors like Robert Donat, John Gielgud, Laurence Olivier. That's where I learned more than any instruction I could, by watching the greats. There was the great music hall where I remember when Fritz Kreisler came, when Paderewski came, when Mura Limpany, and I'll never forget the gorgeous dress. So I had all these things, and I belonged to a family who, first of all, believed I had a father, and you must remember he was an Edwardian, and but he believed that his girls should have as good education as anyone. There was none of this, oh, well, it's all right for a boy, but, you know, a girl's going to get married, and what a waste and that. He believed that his girls should have the best education. There were books, always books. We had a library at the corner of our street. He was a great fan of theatre. So somehow or other, the pennies would be scratched, and I would save my Saturday pennies. I used to write compositions at school, and there were 2 sixpenny prizes in elementary school. I always won one. And I won it honestly, but that took me to the theatre on a Saturday afternoon. So coming from a very loving environment, a very culturally rich environment, I really felt I'd come to the end of the world. But what I found was, first of all, a wonderful neighbor in a person called Rita Ravenko, who was just a godsend to me. And of course, I'd made my bed, and so I had to lie on it. And if it was terribly cold, or terribly hot, or I was terribly pregnant, I had to put up with these things. Do you know, Bruce, the mosquitoes came from Manitoba, Saskatchewan, North Idaho, South Idaho, state of Washington, Montana, and all points east and west, looked down and said, what a glorious piece of Scottish beef. And they fed on me, and I was poisoned by mosquitoes. We came out with what we called winter coats, what you would wear, well, not you, or you'd look silly, but what we would wear in spring or autumn here, and I had hypothermia. I got frozen. So, I mean, it was a physical assault. And then there was the emotional thing of starting a life with someone who was virtually a stranger to you, and adapting. And, but always I found such kind people, dear people, you know. I remember, you see, you can't shut me up, but the only transportation were the old streetcars. And, you know, with the rattan seats and the man up the front and the clanging and thing. And I remember saying to my husband, he said, why don't you go downtown? I said, how do I get down there? This was from 12th Street and 6th Avenue North. He says, you go up to 13th Street and you stand on a corner and the streetcar will come by. And I said, well, do you put out your hand to indicate that you want to go on? He says, no, just stand on the corner. Now, Bruce, I knew that nice girls like me did not stand on corners. I mean, we might stop the traffic that way. But indeed, that was how the streetcars came. And so I've lived through quite a phase of life in southern Alberta, but always found friends. In fact, not till I had my accident did I realize how many friends I had and how many lives had touched me.
Right, we could get into the accident, but that's going to
forget that one.
Move ahead. I want to stay back a while if we can. Could you tell us about how you met your husband in Scotland?
Yes. You see, my life in the war, you know, when Neville Chamberlain said those words, and we are at the state of war with Germany, that was cataclysmic. My father served in the First World War. In fact, he was an old contemptible, and that was the original army that went out and fought at the Battle of Mons, and they were dismissed as a contemptible little army. And I was born in Egypt to a military family. We came to Aberdeen. I was engaged to a young naval officer who was killed when I was 17, which was a terrible tragedy. And I ran off and volunteered for everything. The WAF, I had already served at barely 16 in the fire service as a volunteer, running up to when there was an air raid. I had been machine gunned and bombed by that time. And anyway, I ran off and volunteered for everything, and I was underage. So as soon as I hit the required age, I volunteered for the Women's Land Army, which was the best preparation I could have ever had for coming to Canada. Because A, I was away from home for the first time. I had to deal with manure, or, you know, the rougher side, and it was wonderful. So this particular day, you see, I come into town, and the form was, you went skating in the afternoon, and you went dancing at night. And that's how you met boys. I don't know how they meet boys now. It's very difficult. And so this particular day, I went skating. And you see, all the Canadians would be there, and the Americans. And then the Canadians would do that great thing. You'd be hanging over the rail like this, you see, sort of looking over the chaps. And they would come up, and that great hockey stop, you know, on the side of their skates, and then you get a face full of ice. So you really knew that they cared. And so these couple of Canadians came up. And the next thing, I'm sailing around, you know, being well supported by these two. And I noticed this chap, this Canadian soldier, and I thought, you're nice. He was helping a little girl to skate. And I thought, you're nice. And that's what always appeals to me, you see. So I was extremely quick at changing into my shoes and sort of lingered outside. And my husband dashed up, my husband-to-be dashed up, and said, will you go out with me tonight? Now, by this time, I was engaged to another chap. I didn't have lots of boyfriends, but they always wanted to marry me. And I said, yes. So we went to the movies, and we both fell asleep in the movie. It was so darn dull. And one thing led to another. We got engaged, and then D-Day came along, and he was sent overseas. And then I got a telegram arriving home, and we had to take all sorts of tests to prove that we were suitable wives for these Canadian soldiers, blood tests and that kind of thing. And he arrived on the Thursday. We got married on the Saturday. We had a week's leave, and he was gone again. And that was it. You know?
How long had you known him?
If you put it in compressed time, I would say less than a week. But being a creature of impulse, and he had the most winning smile. And so I guess that was it. And we were all terribly faithful, you know. I still went dancing, but you didn't go home with anybody because you were engaged. And we were the last of the old-time virgins. To be quite honest, you know, it was a different world. It was a very innocent world in the face of a tremendous cataclysmic trauma. There was this, you know, nice girls didn't, you know.
It was, you said it was compressed, it was less than a week.
It was.
How long was it?
Well, it stretched over, we met just before Christmas, and he was horribly insulted because I took him with me to a bookshop to buy a present for the boy that I was engaged to. And the next thing, I Dear John, this fellow, for which I'm still paying, you know, it was cruel. And so then I saw him on a few occasions. He proposed, and then he was gone, I think, maybe almost a year. And then we got married June the 2nd, 1945.
Were there a lot of girls that you knew married Canadians?
Oh, yes. The Canadians were very popular. And we belonged to a war brides organization, and the government of Canada, trying to prepare us for life in Canada, would give us lectures and that kind of thing. They sent us Eaton's catalogue. And, you know, if you think of the deprivations, you know, coupons for clothing, little bits of food, etc. I mean, we really had rationing over there. And so when we opened this marvelous catalogue, and there were all these beautiful dresses, this kind of thing that Judy Garland was wearing, you know, when she starred with Mickey Rooney, it was like, my goodness, what we didn't realize, we weren't going to have the money to be able to buy any of those things when we came over. And then they asked if those war brides who didn't have children would volunteer to take babies who were the detritus of war to Canada. Now, they might have Canadian relations. Their parents may have been killed. They may have been born out of wedlock. And of course, your eternal volunteer who didn't know one end of a baby from the other, I volunteered, and that's how I came to take this little baby out to Canada called Johnny. And I loved him dearly. He was in terrible condition when I got him. I got his belongings in a paper bag. He had, his poor little bottom was raw with these terrible hard flannelette diapers. He had eczema. I actually went around, I took him to the medical officer. I went round and begged clothes from other ward brides for this baby. And when I got on the Queen Mary, I was able to buy things for him. And he was lovely. He was 18 months old. He had bright red curly hair. And he'd wake up in the morning. I was very fortunate. Most ward brides were in salons of 40 beds, you know. I and another ward bride had a capon. So Johnny would be in the lower bunk, and he'd wake up in the morning and climb on the guardrail and say, "Mum, mum, mum, mum," and I would lean over and I'd pick him up and I'd put him on my chest, and we'd play, you know, loving games. And when he came off the Mary with me, they had lines of soldiers on both sides, and one would take any children that you had in your arms, the other would take your luggage. And I always remember this big French-Canadian fellow, and he says, "I bet for sure this one's papa is good, proud of him." Well, I didn't disabuse him of the idea, but that was the baby that I took. And then by the next year, I was expecting my own baby.
And what happened to Johnny?
I tell you, when I arrived in Medicine Hat, we had watched ward brides being greeted all across Canada. And sometimes you say, you know, this lovely girl, what kind of family is she going to? Or you knew that this young woman was a tart. And I mean, we came in all sizes, shapes, etc., and temperaments. And you say, it looks as though she's going to a nice family. So we arrived in Medicine Hat, and I didn't realize that you switched trains there and took the spur line down to Lethbridge. So they had wanted to take Johnny the night before, and I started to cry, and so they left him with me, and then the Red Cross woman came and took him. And so I'm watching all these war brides being greeted, and suddenly something grabs me and kisses me. And I look up, and there is my husband, first time in civvies, broad hat, a tie that I always describe as looking like a ruptured poached egg. And I looked at him and I thought, my God, who is this masked man, you know? Do I have to love him for the next 50 years? And so we started walking up the station platform, and the Red Cross lady came out with Johnny. And he looked at me and he said, "Mum, Mum." And I had to run from him, crying. And, you know, people have been running from this baby all his very brief life. So I wound up in the Assiniboine Hotel, which at that time was the hotel, like the Mark was here, and sitting on the bed crying. And I never forgot, my husband said, "I will go up to Calgary, and if he hasn't gone to a good home, I'll bring him back to you." And I looked at my husband and I thought, I can love you for 50 years. So I have a picture of Johnny. His new parents, in fact, his new father was an uncle, his real uncle. And I got a letter inviting me, and I wrote back and said no. It was a new beginning for him, and I didn't want him to be lumbered with anything of the past, and it was a new beginning for me. But can you imagine, he would be about your age now, Bruce, and wouldn't it be wonderful if you walked in and said, "Mum, I'm Johnny." So that was my first baby. I always consider that my first baby.
That's great.
So.
Well, it looks like time's run out, but
And
obviously...
we've only got as far as 47.
That's right. We'll make this into a 52-week
Yes, episodes. And then you can turn it into a soap opera.
That's right. Well, it's been great having you, Joan, and I think we're going to have you next week again and see if
I'd love to.
See if we can make a few more years.
Right.
That's right.
Well, that's why I compress the years. You see, that's why they don't reflect on my face. Real thing.
Well, we'll see you next week, and I'll see you next week. And real nice. Well. again to Who's Who in Southern Alberta. Well, we brought Joan back, Joan Waterfield that is, because of course if you were watching last week's program you realized that we're still back in 47.
Only another 40 years to go.
We covered 2 years. But we had a great time, and you might be hearing Joan in the background. She's training her buffalo chip that we gave her last week. Joan, tell us, show us what it'll do this week.
Well, I'm amazed with this because they may, I don't know whether they'll replace Greek worry beads or marbles, perhaps, you know. Yeah. But I thought, well, I shall place it thus and so and see if it does its stuff.
Now that
there it is.
The chip launcher, very
yes,
good. Within
yes.
about 2 seconds.
Yes,
3
you
seconds?
see. Well, you see, I spent a week training this
and
thing.
you can you know, develop all kinds of games, like have chips. Who goes off first? Get it in the coffee.
Coffee,
cup,
exactly. Yes.
You let's see how it does without the help of the chip launcher.
Oh, I know, but don't you think I should massage, you know, just a little bit more,
chip,
you know, just
chip.
my chip. So I get to do it.
That's massaging. That's ripping it to pieces.
No, it isn't. It's doing its stuff. It's feeling the power, the force is at work here.
Okay.
Okay. Now
you haven't got it bent right. I can tell you that right now. You've got it bent the wrong way. You've got to have it pushed in like this. Whoops.
Well, you see, I don't know. Okay. All right. Now go do your stuff.
While we're waiting, I
yes.
just mentioned.
I hope the suspense isn't killing us.
This is a special project we've developed for the 200th anniversary of the first written documentation of Southern Alberta, the arrival of the explorer Peter Fiddler. We could tell you where he came to and all that, but we don't want to do that right now. But we would mention that last week we talked about the chip, and I mentioned that on each chip, and these are available for $1 if you want to contact the station, we can make sure that you get yours, and hopefully everybody will have them by 2 years hence. But this is the buffalo that's on the buffalo chip. The first sketch that was ever done of a buffalo, done by a Spaniard who had never seen, I think it was 1554. He had never seen a buffalo, but he had heard about them, and he sat down one day and made a woodcut of it. The head's a little small, maybe, but other than that, I think he did a pretty good job.
Well, it certainly would give you the hump, wouldn't it?
Yeah, looks like
I guess he got his information from the conquistadores when they came in.
That's the buffalo that is on these magnificent little chips here that we have, and anyway, that's that story. And the last part, before we get into the story of Joan past 1947,
yes.
I would mention that we're going to publish the Journal of Peter Fiddler, the first written description of Southern Alberta, and we're waiting for 50 people that would like to have such a book. It's sort of a special interest thing, and once we have the 50 people, we will go to the press and everybody can find out exactly what happened back in 1792. Mm-hmm. Now we want to find out what happened in 1948, right?
1948, yes. Well,
Joan,
by 1948, I had a baby.
Well, there we go.
Yes, and we had moved from our little two-roomed house on the north side with the outhouse to a small wartime house on 10th Avenue South. And, you know, the wiseacres then would say, oh, they're using green wood, those houses will never last and everything. Those wartime houses are still around, in many cases beautifully embellished and extended and that kind of thing.
We do our tours, as you know, and I always like to go down one of the streets with the wartime houses.
Yes.
Because you see the evolution of the house.
House, exactly, and just what people have done with it. Still a lot of the original owners, still living this over 40 years later in those houses.
That's right.
The house I live in at present was built in 1917. I have a love for old houses, which I think I share with you. Mm-hmm. And it was known as the Hearst House. I don't know how long I have to live to have it called the Waterfield House, but it was it's located in a place that was called Little Wigan, on 13th Street North, because that's where the Lancashire miners came from, Wigan in Lancashire.
Right, now you've been in that house for quite a few years, haven't you?
Gosh, it must be over 20 years. Huh. And it's falling down around my ears, but that's all right. I still love it.
Have you done a little history on the Hearsts themselves?
No. I was too busy keeping up with the Waterfields and 3 children and a job and community involvement and stage life and broadcasting and writing and that kind of thing.
Well, we got to get into some of these things. Because we've mentioned the fact that you remember the series of doors that you go through?
Yes.
And we're now at the door
that opens into broadcasting.
Right, so let's hear about that.
Well, the first thing I did was do book reviews. And that was when they went into production. It wasn't a top 40 station or anything like that. There were people, there was a pulse there, not a machine. And that was at CJOC. And they asked for someone to come up from the library and do book reviews. We took voice tests and everything. Didn't hear anything for 6 weeks. And the next thing they said, you're on the air. And then when I looked at these book reviews, I asked if I could write my own, because I knew what people were reading in Lethbridge and what they were looking for. And so that started that. The next thing, they discovered I was doing children's story, and I was on the air with a sponsor, McCall's Peanut Butter. Not a happy choice, because I hate peanut butter, but never mind. And then I had another baby. I kept having these babies. I worked at the Herald, on an interim basis, which extended. I was doing the broadcasting on a sort of part-time thing, and I had this baby, my Elizabeth, and so then I was going there, and they said, well, why don't you write some promotional copy? This is the way I always get snagged. Come and help us out. Well, since you're here, will you stay a little longer? Well, since you're staying a little longer, you might as well stay. So I wound up being the copy editor there. And then I'm jumping years, and then I was expecting my Christopher. And this was me. I always kept trying to quit work because I was not a career woman. I was brought up on a background, a very traditional background, where you married and you stayed home and looked after your children and that. But circumstances didn't allow for this. So then that was me finished. But at that time, Czech Radio was opening, and as a matter of fact, I helped write the brief that got Czech Radio the license. And my very dear friend Ed Combo was the production manager. So it was, come over and give us some ideas. Well, since you're coming, will you do a children's show? Well, since you're doing a children's show, will you stay a little longer and write some copy for us? So you see, the net expanded and enclosed me. Then my next thing was to go to what was then CGLH TV. And I stayed there until 67, and I had a cancer scare. And that's one thing that will really bring you up sharp and say, what is this life? What are you doing with it? So I quit and thought, that's it. I've worked all these years, no more. And I went to a meeting of the Centennial Committee for 67 and wound up as the Centennial Coordinator, which led in to being asked to go to the Bowman Arts Centre and work with the Allied Arts Council. In the meantime, CFCN had opened, and they wanted to have a morning show, and I was asked to do that. In the meantime, CGLH wanted me back there to do their show, and so I left CFCN on very happy terms, and my dearest friend, Elisha Rasmussen, took over for me. And I stayed with the station there while carrying on with the Arts Council as their executive director until they had the strike. And not being a member of the union or really involved in any way, but it was my crew. And I always figured when you do one of these talk shows, you're a team. You're not just that person that appears in there. So I left the station rather than cross that picket line. Once in a while you have to do something for your principles. So then the major part of my life was devoted to the arts. I mean, the major part of my life outside my family. And I was with the Arts Council for 21 years. And that was wonderful years. The pay wasn't great, but you were able, I was part of bringing wonderful artists here, of getting things started like drama festivals. I ran a youth theatre for 8 years, which is the most joyful involvement in the theatre I've ever had. Out of that, I've got a minister, professional actors, teachers. I don't know, the whole bunch of that era came. And my last and final thing was to get the Performing Arts Summer School started for children who wanted to be involved in theatre at the Bowman Arts Centre. And my big dream is to win the 649 and endow that school so that any child will not be precluded because of money from attending it. So I've still got lots of dreams.
Well, it's unfortunate. You know, the first program, we took a whole program to do 2 years. Now, all of a sudden, we've done 40 years.
Well, you see, once my motor starts running, you know.
Now we got to backtrack. And
all right,
I'd
back
like
we
to
go
look,
again.
look at a few of these things. First of all, why did you give up the youth theatre?
Actually, because I had started directing for Main Stage. Now, I ran this youth theatre with no money. I'm a great believer that you can do an amazing amount of stuff without money. And all I asked from the Arts Council, and of course they were highly supportive, was that I'd have a space. And you see, other things developed to give these youngsters these opportunities. Quite frankly, at one time, there weren't drama programs in the schools. It was a case, you teach science, and you've been to the theatre, okay. Now you know that situation, don't you?
Yes.
And so, not every day was a Murray Robinson born. And actually, youth theatre grew out of a high school drama festival where an adjudicator was very cruel and had these children crying. And I said to them, look, if I can help in any way, come and see me. This young lad who went to work in an oil rig in the North Sea walked in. He said, did you mean what you said? I said, oh yes, but I'm not going out looking for you. And he went out and he had 30 kids out there. And so by the time we had worked through youth theatre, there were good drama programs in the school, so I wasn't leaving a vacuum. And I had broken through into getting these youngsters involved in community theatre, instead of saying, you've got to be this age and that age and everything, if the kid had the stuff. And of course, the idea of youth theatre wasn't to turn out performers. It was to turn out human beings that listened, that looked at life, that could understand what was being said, that would have when you're young, you really have tunnel vision. And also to give youngsters, so often in education, it is a tunnel. You can go through all the cause, but you're still wondering what the effect is going to be, Bruce. I wanted to give them an opportunity to take on something, because the eternal cry to youngsters was, oh, you start everything, but you never finish anything. I wanted to give them the opportunity to finish something and say, I did that. I wanted to teach them to have the confidence to succeed, but also the confidence to fail, having given everything that you had to it, that there was no failure in that. And so, and the lovely thing is they all come back to me. They all come and see me. And you see, a new lot has come with the Performing Arts Summer School. And so this is my dream. As a teacher, you know, you never know what influence you have. And you can never say thank you to that teacher who maybe just turned that corner for you. And what you hope is it'll be passed on. I'm paying back 2 teachers in my life for everything I ever did. They gave me so much. So there you are. That's my philosophy. And obviously something that I love very dearly.
Well, you've been in a lot of... Have you ever counted up how many plays you've been in yourself?
No, but I am the only actress. I mean, this is where I remember I said I was a twinkle in the eye of fate when you said I was a star. But I'm the only actress who ever won the Best Actress award, twice. And this was in the days of the drama festivals, the 3-act drama. Yes, the 3-act, well, the Alberta Drama Festival led on to the Dominion. And the festival movement was wonderful. And you know, the thing is, again, money. We saved up to go. There weren't grants. We put on our plays and took the profits, you know, or we had bake sales or something like that. And there is a tendency to say, I will go if you'll pay all my expenses. You know, Bruce, I had one dress that went to, I bought it for $19.95 in Cameron's Ladies Wear, if you ever want to research dress shops. And I wore it to every drama festival. People would say, I don't recognize the face, but I sure know the dress, you know? And they were highlights of our lives to go to this, to go to a drama seminar and work with Tyrone Guthrie and have the opportunity to go professional and to turn it down. Whereas Sandy McCallum, my friend, went and has been involved with the theatre. I had 3 children and a husband. I wouldn't leave them. And Sandy was able to take his family.
What year was this? Was this about the same year?
This was in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And so I turned my life back into community theatre But I'm a great believer, if you're going to go on that stage, you should learn your trade, learn the craft, and then it may develop into an art. So I paint sets, I usher, I will do anything around a theatre, scrub floors or anything, because it's an environment I love, and the friends that I've made over those years, the wonderful friends. And of course, in acting, it's not acting, it's reacting. So you're only as good as what will be given to you. And that's one of the big lessons. So you just can't go center stage and say, here I am, ain't I gorgeous? You've got to have what is given to you. Then you give back. And then the magic happens, because if it's going across the stage, it goes out and encompasses an audience. And then you can have some of the most wonderful moments. And of course, it's wonderful because people laugh when I say I'm essentially a terribly shy person. I was horribly shy as a teenager. I see that skeptical look in your eye. But I've always had to fight shyness. And going on stage was the way to put on another persona. Just as I created a persona when I had to go out to work. I was horribly shy. So there you are. I thought nobody would ever give me a job. Nobody would ever want to marry me. You know, I had, talk about your stock, shy teenager, tall, skinny, with a gorgeous sister, you know. I had all the breaks.
You were mentioning last week about how you finally find out who your friends are, and you mentioned when you had your accident, and I think I sidetracked you and we went back instead of forward. Tell us about that event in your life.
Well, I was directing a production of Hello, Dolly. And actually, if I hadn't been so damn conscientious, I would have been up in Red Deer at a reunion with my war brides. But I felt I couldn't leave the cast at that time. We'd had problems trying to find a choreographer, etc., etc. And so we were on our first time on the 8th stage, and they'd taken out the pit. And I said to Brian Tedder, my wonderful stage manager, will you put masking tape around that pit so that the cast is aware of it, you see? So, fine. Well, the first number we're doing is the big one. Hello, Dolly, you know, when Dolly's going to make her entrance and the waiters are coming on and everything. And they're coming on like funeral sidesmen, you know, hello, Dolly. So I leap onto the stage and I says, come on, chaps, it's hello, Dolly. Well, hello, Dolly. And I'm backing up, and with the hello, Dolly, it was goodbye, Joni. Down I fell. And I noticed this leg was at a peculiar angle, and my leading man, who was tall and handsome and wonderful, got into the pit and cradled me in his arms. And of course I was ready to stay there for the next 6 months. I mean, I hadn't been so comfortable in a long time. And my friend Gary Kahn looked over and he said, what's happened? And I said, oh, Gary, I think I've broken my leg. And so he's saying, your doctor did this, and I'm saying, you know, phone my best friend, you know. He's your doctor and everything. So then the paramedics come, and they're being so kind, handsome young fellas, you know. And I said to them, do you dance? And they thought, oh, the old girl, she's gone bonkers, you know, she must have hit her head. And I said, no, I'm serious. I need more dancing waiters up there. So they padded me up and, you know, put this cradle around my leg and wheeled me off to St. Michael's, and there's my doctor and a rather attractive youngish doctor, and Keith Loring's a friend of mine, and Tom Milling's my doctor, my dear friend also. And they've got me stretched out, and I said to Keith, who's the surly youth? And I'm giving away secrets. And he said, oh, that's Hop the Honorary Orthopod, he never smiles. I says, I'll make him smile. So they wheel me in for surgery, you see, and I'm on a gurney. Now, when I go to the supermarket, guess who gets the basket with the wheels that go sideways? That was the gurney. And it's banging against them, and the nurse is saying, sorry, Joan. And then they take me in, and I say, you know, you can cut off my slacks if you like. And it's the first time I saw the blood at the side. And I thought, now that's interesting. And they said, oh, we'll get them off. And they cut off my ring and that, and then they rolled me over and gave me a shot here and a shot there. And the next thing, I'm being lifted onto the Love Boat of gurneys. And I said, this is wonderful. And then they lift me into my bed, And I still got my sweater on and my panties and my makeup and the whole thing. Generally, you know, they strip everything off before surgery. And so I said, and the nurse is going to get one of those gowns, you know, with the hyperventilation at the back. And I said very diffidently to her, do you think the doctor will have time to look at my leg tomorrow? And she says, my God, Joan, she says, you've been 3 hours in surgery. So I looked down and realized I had this cast on my leg. So it was a very, very bad break, and I now have a crooked leg. And I mean, I've broken everything in the theatre. My nose, my toe, everything's got broken in the theatre, collarbone, the whole works. But this was really the coup de grace. So they had to do 2 operations. So I asked if you know, was there a space of time? Because I was anxious to get back to the cast. And so he allowed, so I could have 2 weeks to be with the cast. And I went through the show, but I got very ill and very tired. And that's where friendship comes in. I got hundreds of cards, hundreds of visitors, flowers, from people I didn't even know. But the staunchest person was my dearest friend, Alicia Rasmussen. I can never repay. You know, sometimes life is really, you know, that slam comes on, then you know just how wonderful some people are. So that's the blessing of my life and my friends.
And you were on crutches for...
I was in a wheelchair, and have you ever tried to vacuum a house in a wheelchair? And you back up and the cord goes round it? And then I was on crutches, then I was on the 2 sticks, and then I got down to the 1, and every so often it gets tired. But I tell you what I did do. There was one night I was alone, I was feeling very unhappy, I was in pain. And you know, when people send cards, etc., to the hospital, you think, oh, that's nice, you know. And I saw this, I looked at this stack, hundreds of cards, sitting on my dresser. And I got up and I crawled into my wheelchair, and I went and got masking tape, and I papered my hall with all these cards, and there were drawings from children and everything. And I looked at it and I said, you know, you're not coming down until not only can I walk, but I can dance, because I love dancing. And the funny thing is, Bruce, in the middle of the night I'd hear, and this was where the tape had dried out and a card would fall. But it gave me the opportunity to open that card again and look at it and say, they thought about me, stick her up again. So that was my revitalizing, my ongoing encouragement, that wall of cards, right down this great long hall. I had it.
You know, interesting enough, I used that same technique many years ago myself. It wasn't cards.
No.
That's how I quit smoking. I cut the in front of each export package, and I pasted it on the wall.
What a marvelous idea.
My whole room was cigarette packages, and I thought, you know, 33 cents here, 33 cents there.
Yes, exactly. Well, I quit after 40 years when I went into surgery the last time. Do you know they've got a memorial room? They call it the Joan Waterfield Memorial Room. And it's 310 on the 3rd floor of St. Michael's. If you're ever going to have surgery, you go in that room. The vibes are wonderful.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
A little metal plaque?
No, not yet. But one of these days I reckon that. I've been so often in that room, you know. And, you know, they're quite used to me up there. What, you back again? You know, all the bits. I swear to goodness that they've got enough spare parts of me over there that they could create a clone, you know.
Yeah. They probably have a little room and they have all the stuff labeled.
All the bits and pieces, and we're collecting bits of oh, here's her gallbladder. Oh, let's put that away, you know. A nice bit that, yes. And then, oh, this was something, oh, that was that. Oh, yes, we'll put that in there. So they've got all these bits, you know, laying them out. On the
crazy world, Joan.
Isn't that a grim thought? You know, fun and forensics. That would be it.
How long was it since the accident before you threw away your last crutch?
It was my last prop. It was over 2 years.
Over 2 years.
Yes, and it was a long thing. But I danced. Can you imagine this? These friends of mine, Don and Nina Charles, I went to the Legion with them to the dance, and I'm in my wheelchair, you see. And it's the end of their 60th anniversary wind-up. And, you know, they're playing my music. I'm talking big band music, In the Mood, Satin Doll, all that great stuff. And I was quite skinny at that time, and my little old rear end is bouncing to this music, you know, da 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 da. And this chap who was a single amputee came over in his wheelchair, and he said, "Would you care to dance?" And I said, "I'm dying to." He says, "Come on." So we wheel out onto the floor, and we jived. And you know the jive turn when he grabs your turn and your partner whips you around, you see? Well, he pulled me, and as I turned, he caught my wheelchair, spun me. Now, if he hadn't caught my hand, I would have been through 10 tables, 50 gallons of beer, and 60 people, but he always caught me. Then when I was on my crutches, I was down at a reunion in Saskatchewan, a War Brides reunion, and this chap came and says, "Last time I saw you, you were jiving up a storm in Medicine Hat." And I says, "Look at me now." He says, "Do you want to dance?" And I said, "Yes." So he put one of my crutches under his arm, put his hand around my waist, I put my hand on his shoulder, and we jiggled, and it was great. So the heart is always dancing. Yes. That's the main message there, hon, even when it, you know, you're physically inhibited. But, and every so often you'll see me limp. It gets tired, and it gets sore, and I get mad. And but I hope to be tap dancing this year, and a little slow on the turn, that leg.
Now, when we started this series, Joan, we sort of started on the War Brides.
Yes.
So I'd like to sort of end on the War Brides as well. You're strong in the organization, I believe?
Oh yes, we have a wonderful group here. And the funny thing is, Bruce, is that we sort of clung together in the initial, you know, and then as our families came and our horizons broadened, we, you know, sort of devoted our lives. Here we are, women in our 60s and 70s, and we're coming back together.
Yeah, there was a period of time where you didn't hear much about it.
No.
The organization sort of died.
Well, it wasn't that it died, just that it wasn't necessary anymore. But now we come back and we share that we had so much in common in those years past. And so it's you're touching base and renewing friendships, which is wonderful when you're a senior citizen. Like I'm hot to trot on our senior center, which is wonderful. I've made so many friends down there, and old friends, new friends, friendship at any time in your life. Never shut yourself away from life. And sometimes you have to give yourself a damn good kick in the seat and say, you've got to go out. You've got to put your nose outside that door, or you're just going to shrivel up and die, and I'm not ready to go yet, you know?
What percentage of the seniors would you say belong to the senior center? Do you have any idea?
I've no idea, but it would hurt me to think that anybody. You see, often there are couples, and they're self-sufficient in themselves and their interests and that kind of thing. They don't find a need yet. But you know, when I hit my 60th birthday, the day after, I walked over and joined up. And my friend said, "You're not old enough." I said, "Look, face the facts. I'm 60. Damn gorgeous 60, but never mind, they're 60. And I said, I don't want to be one of those sad people who drift along and never admit their years. I mean, the fullness of years is something to be proud of. If I wake up in the morning and I'm alive, that's 99% of it, you know. I can take care of the other 1%. But I can go swimming there, I can have a meal there in company with people I like. I can go down there and work in the kitchen. I can do all of these things, take trips, you know. It's wonderful.
Well, Joan, we've run out of time. We covered
and we compressed the years.
50 years or 40 years in half an hour.
Yes.
Which was a lot better than the 2 years we did the first half an hour.
First 2 years were good, though.
Anyway, we really enjoyed having you, and I'm sure that the people that listen to the program, I've had people over the years that says, "Get Joan Waterfield. I finally got you."
Okay,
So,
I'll come back on my 70th birthday.
well, I hope so, and you'll have a whole bunch more stories to tell us.
A million of them
And
all
you'll
the
probably
time.
have that buffalo chip train. Look at the thing still sitting there.
Yes, you
Hasn't
see,
done a
that
thing.
didn't you? Yes, because you didn't do it right. So we'll do it right now.
Well, we'll give you a few months to train and see what happens.
Oh.
Anyway, Joan, it was great having you, and thanks for coming, and thank you, people.
There.
What
It's
an
perfect
ending,
cue. Right on
See you
cue.
again next week.